We'll talk about ESPN. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth of Motor City Madmouth. Pleased to be joined by Bob Glauber, the author of The Forgotten First. But before we get into your book, Bob, let's talk about your time that I know that you work for ESPN and your media career. Let everybody know a little bit of background about it.
Well, I did work at ESPN, boy, on the early days of Cold Pizza, which turned into First Take. So the Skip Bayless, Stephen A. Smith show that we all know now, that started as Cold Pizza back in, I think it was 2003. Right. So I was there and got to do some debates with Skip Bayless. But my Newsday is my, that's my home, my journalistic home, if you will.
Well, I know Woody Page was a part of that operation back in the day. He had some real journalists back then. So, all right, I know we're going to talk about the book. You really opened up a question here that I've got to ask about Stephen A. Smith, okay? What is this character like to work with? Is he as loud as, would you be able to have an alarm with his voice on there that would wake you up very big times?
You'd wake up to Stephen A. Smith if it was on your alarm. I find him to be an engaging person. I found Skip Bayless as people. I like both of them, and I got along and get along with both of them. They're kind of down to earth. I know it's not a phrase you'd expect to connect with both of them, but they're just kind of regular people outside of the TV studio. And then there's the personalities that draw a lot of viewers to what they do and what they say.
So do you still watch that show very much?
Sure.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, I find Smith to be interesting. He might be a little loud, but I will tell you this much, okay? Especially when you're used to like to work the Bob Lees and the Chris Bermans, and we all know how iconic they are. But even though he's a little loud, I do give the guy credit though. He does go ahead and prepare really well.
Oh yeah, and he knows sports and he knows what he's talking about. Listen, there's passion in sports. We all love sports, and he, goes sometimes above and beyond about the intensity of it. But that's why he's a household name.
Yeah, well, I guess the only thing he knows about hockey, according to what he says, is the puck is black. So I'll kind of leave that out there for you folks to go out there and comment. Now, obviously, the real reason that you're here today is to promote the book, The Forgotten Verse. So why don't you give everybody an overview about what they will benefit by buying your book?
Well, everyone knows about Jackie Robinson, right? The first African-American to break the color barrier in Major League Baseball. Everybody knows. I was walking around the Giants locker room about 3 or 4 years ago thinking, this is a really diverse, it's a workplace. I mean, it's a sport, people love playing, but it's a workplace. You work at the place, and it's a really diverse place. How did it get this way? Was it always this way? I've covered the NFL since 1985, and it's always been diverse, but I'm just saying, well, what was it like before that? And then I said, is there a Jackie Robinson of pro football? I didn't know. And I literally was on my phone Googling while we're waiting to talk to the Giants, and I look up and I find Kenny Washington, first black player in the modern NFL. Kenny Washington. Did not know the name. In my head, I'm embarrassed that I don't know this guy's name. Then, kind of do a little more research on the whole thing. It's not just Kenny Washington, it's Kenny Washington had a teammate, Woody Strode, and also in that same year, Bill Willis and Marion Motley played for the Cleveland Browns. It's 1946. So I'm like, well, I am paid to cover football. It's my job, and I don't know this. I've got to believe that most of America does not know this story, and that's the truth. They just don't. It's not been talked about. There was a ban on black players from 1934 to 1945. Not allowed in the NFL. Nothing written, nothing codified in their constitution, nothing that says it expressly, but the fact is there were no black players for 12 seasons in the NFL. I found it stunning, and we just don't know. So the rest, I had a conversation with Keyshawn Johnson. I felt that it was important to partner with somebody who kind of had a unique perspective about it. He didn't know the story. He was angry that he didn't know the story because it wasn't taught to him, because it's just not become a part, it was not a part of our culture. And there's just this unique absence of history and documentation about this time. And you bring it forward to today's world, and there's a lot of meaning to it.
All right, well, you talked a little bit about the LA Rams and not being able to play in that venue. Do you care to elaborate a little bit about what came from behind that?
Sure. So in 1945, last year of World War II, it was the Cleveland Rams. They played it before they went to LA. They were playing in Cleveland. They won the NFL championship that year. But the owner, Dan Reeves, was not drawing a lot of crowds. He knew he couldn't continue to stay in Cleveland, especially with Paul Brown forming the Cleveland Browns in the first year of the All-American Football Conference. So Dan Reeves takes his team to LA. Great, he's got the West Coast all to himself, and he's expecting to just be welcomed with open arms. They wanted to play in the LA Coliseum. But it was a publicly owned building, publicly funded building, publicly constructed building, and some black sports writers at the time showed up to a Coliseum Commission meeting and said they can't be allowed to play here because this is a public building built in part by black workers. This team needs to be integrated to be able to play here. So the team had no idea this was coming. But one thing led to another, and Kenny Washington became the player that was targeted. Why? Because Kenny Washington was an immensely popular player for the UCLA Bruins in the 1930s. And this is now 46, so his career is winding down as an effective player, but Kenny was the guy that they wanted. So the Rams eventually, a couple of months later, said, okay, we'll do it. We'll sign Kenny Washington, and thus began integration in the modern NFL, to the point where today's NFL is comprised of 70% African American football players. Compared to baseball, where Jackie Robinson played with these guys, Kenny Washington and Woody Strode. Jackie played with them at UCLA. He broke the color barrier in pro baseball. And baseball today is less than 8% African American. So everyone knows Jackie Robinson and the impact he had on baseball, but no one knows these four guys, yet they opened the door for now a league that is 70% African American. It started with them.
Okay, with that theme in mind, Bob, okay, we know we've talked about African American hiring concerns with coaching and a lot of things along those lines. I know they've even incentivized a Rooney Rule to add another draft choice for first-time opportunities. Do you feel that the NFL is making good progress with it, or do you feel that they have a ways to go on the minority side? To me, the Rooney Rule looks like it can be circumvented a little bit. Yeah. It's an attempt. It's noble and fine, but is it getting the job done, and how much more work has to be done?
No, quite frankly, it's not getting the job done because the representation in the coaching community is just not there. Brian Flores suing the league is kind of like a real important watershed moment. So no, it has not gotten better for black coaches. It's actually gotten worse. Not long ago, there were, I think, 6 black coaches,
right,
and that has gone down significantly. So there is a long way to go. I think the league itself, Roger Goodell, league officials are trying to do whatever they can. It's up to the owners to make those decisions in hiring, and they have chosen not to go down that route for the most part.
As we talk about this, and I'll be very careful how I express this to you, I do remember once upon a time when Nightline had Ted Koppel on with the Al Campanis situation, and I really felt bad for Campanis because he was digging himself a hole that he couldn't get out of. And I don't know whether that's helped out baseball or not in terms of more diversity and so forth. Well, what was your thoughts about the Campanis Koppel situation?
Well, I recently looked back on that. It was just, I don't know how you can't defend it, and he walked into it. You could just see it. It's like it's slow motion car accident happening.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, and and the rest is history. And Jimmy the Greek had a similar instance in an interview of his. So times are different now. I don't know that you'd have that interview, but it certainly stuck out and as something that There was just no walking back from.
Yeah, it's amazing how a guy, and I got to know Al Campanis at the 1981 baseball winter meeting with Tom, was sort of Steve Brenner and the rest of those folks. And listen, it's hard to believe that a career crashed and burned after 41 years because of something like that. And can you only imagine what would have happened if you had social media at that time versus what had happened?
Yes.
And then
it was huge back then. It would have been monstrous today. You know, that would have dominated the news cycle for a long time. It did then, but it wasn't as intense as then as it is now.
And one other thought before we go back to the book to wrap it up. I know they've had the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth, and then I want to also tie Colin Kaepernick into this thing. Do you think that Colin Kaepernick was ahead of his time when he had his protest, and that he does belong in the NFL?
I think he was ahead of his time. I think I think, you know, if he's a quarterback who still has the capability of playing quarterback, and he does, he should get a chance to play in the NFL again. He took a knee protesting police brutality and racial injustice in America. He took a knee. He didn't hurt anybody. He took a knee. So, you know, I mean, you got to work out with the Raiders. I don't think that's going to happen, and I guess I'd be surprised if he does play. But he's still a very polarizing figure that I think a lot of owners are just not ready to go there. So I don't know that it'll ever happen.
Yeah, I know the Black Lives Matter movement came not only out of that, but the NBA situation as well. And I understand athletes want to use their platform to express what they're doing. Any thoughts about any of all that in terms of how things evolve, what that in relation to what we've seen?
I mean, listen, I think we've seen sports going back to the Olympics in 1968 when you saw John Carlos and Tommy Smith raise their arms, raise their fists. So this is not a new thing. Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali had his form of protest, and I think you're always going to see it to some degree. I don't think there is as much of it now. You know, the NFL crescendo. And there was intensity. They had the George Floyd killing. You had President Trump going after NFL players. So you had these, you know, seismic moments that players reacted to. And you know, I think now it's calmed down. You don't get those moments during the anthem where players protested much, if at all.
Okay, now we'll go back to the book before we wrap it up. I know we've talked about the book in detail, and in a moment I'm going to have you let everybody know how they can get a hold of it and buy the book. But anything that you want people to know about that they really feel that they'll get out of it, outside, in addition to what you've already talked about?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you for asking. I just think you get a sense of perspective about where the NFL was at one time to today. And I start in the book where Kenny Washington walks off the field after his last college game. He walks off to 103,000 people at the LA Coliseum, standing up and roaring for him, a college player who played at UCLA, not USC, it's USC's home building. Phenomenal ovation, 103,000 people. He might have been the greatest player of that season, greatest college player. The same day the NFL holds its draft. He is not taken, and no black players are taken. I don't think people understand just where it came from to where it's gotten today. And it's a fascinating journey. It certainly was for Keyshawn and I to kind of go back and realize that two of these guys grew up 5 miles from where Keyshawn grew up in Los Angeles, and he had no idea that this even happened.
Well, tell me about now you brought Keyshawn up. Give me his role in the book and some of the information that he provides, because now you've really got me intrigued.
Yeah, well, Keyshawn Johnson, you know, I spoke to him about 3 years ago, a little less than 3 years ago, just about this idea. I thought it was important that I needed somebody to help tell this story that had a connection that frankly, I can't have. You know, as a white writer, so Keyshawn and I have known him for 25 years. I've covered him with the Jets. We talked about it. He joked that he thought I was calling him to stir it up about the Jets.
Right.
Like he wanted me to get him to say some negative comments. But I said, no, I have something else. And when I told him about the story, he immediately gravitated. Just immediately, boom, it clicked. He got a little angry that he didn't know about it because he thought that these guys should be part of American culture. So as far as, this was shoulder to shoulder from the conception of it to the execution of it to the research to the history. Now I did the lion's share of the writing. And he's fine with that. He's a pain in the neck as an editor sometimes, but we got through it. And as far as I'm concerned, that is an equal partnership, and I could not have done it without him, and I would not have wanted to do it without him. He's just been that important in it, and in the telling of what this book means, he has been invaluable, and he's been a great ambassador for getting this story out there.
I find it ironic, okay, that you have the Cleveland Rams, moving from obviously the Cleveland Rams to the LA Rams. Mm-hmm. And then you also find the situation where Brooklyn Dodgers to LA Dodgers, and at LA to me is the actual epicenter of where a lot of this is taking place from where the original at.
And then you mentioned the Dodgers. Branch Rickey, who was famous for giving Jackie Robinson a chance a year after these four guys played professionally. Branch Rickey was absolutely impacted by Marion, Motley, and Bill Willis, watching them and realizing that in that day, black players could play in a contact sport and get through it. And it was a game. There were riots didn't break out. There were some fisticuffs because those players were, abused sometimes. But by and large, those players competed in a game. It ended and things went on. And Branch Rickey never forgot it and told and wrote in a letter to Marion Motley, watching you had a profound impact and basically allowed me to let myself sign Jackie Robinson because I knew it was going to be the right time.
One last point I want to mention to you. I find it hard to believe that, one, Patrick Ewing never got an NBA job, whether it was with the Knicks or not. But the biggest thing in connection to this book is why Mean Joe Green never got an opportunity to coach as a head coach in the NFL, knowing full well. Because I actually talked to him about this in Arizona with obviously Coach McGinnis, Dave McGinnis, and he worked under Don Shula and Chuck Noll. Do you feel that was an injustice that Mean Joe Green may have been ahead of his time? I think he would have been a pretty good coach.
Obviously, you never know because it didn't happen, but absolutely. I think there are many, many deserving African American coaches who have not gotten a shot to be head coaches in the NFL. And it's been a struggle for decades. Marion Motley wanted to be an assistant coach in the NFL. Could never, Marion Motley, Hall of Famer, running back, couldn't be an assistant coach in the National Football League. Not even an assistant. And we've come a long way in terms of assistants. A third of all NFL coaches assistant coaches are black, yet vast minority of coaches in head coaches are black. So there's still a long way to go with that. But the discussion has been good. I think the execution of trying to make that better has been lacking.
And yet, meanwhile, Bruce Arians goes on record saying that, if Tom Brady didn't come back, I was going to coach.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I didn't want to leave Todd Bowles in a bad situation. Read into that any way you want.
Yeah, take that for what you will.
Right.
I was a little bit patronizing almost that he did that. But listen, he's very close to Todd Bowles. I know Todd Bowles quite well. He deserved to get another chance after he had no shot with the Jets based on what was going on with the front office and the roster. So good for Todd Bowles. I hope it works out well.
Well, I know we've covered a lot of aspects, folks. I encourage you to go ahead and get a copy of the book, The Forgotten First. So with that said, Bob Glauber, it's been a pleasure having you on Sports Exchange. But we have some business to take care of. Let people know how they can get along and find the book.
Wherever you buy your books, whether it be Walmart, Amazon, Target, or your local indie bookstore like we are right here.
Very good. And this is Scott Morgenroth, Sports Exchange. You can find us at www.southfloridatribune.com. Please subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel, South Florida Tribune YouTube channel, and on Twitter at Tribune South. So on behalf of Bob Glauber, my name is Scott Morgenroth. Thanking you for joining us here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And once again, Bob Glauber, I'm glad to have you on the broadcast, and I look forward to seeing you later on this weekend here at the National Sports Media Association media event. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you, and support your indie bookstore.